There was a time when the land now called the United States was not a nation at all. It was a chain of 13 British colonies hugging the eastern edge of North America, loyal to a king across the ocean, protected by the British Empire, and deeply tied to its trade, laws, and power. But in less than a decade, those same colonies would rise up against the greatest empire on earth, fight a brutal and uncertain war, and do something almost unthinkable for their time. They would declare that ordinary people had the right to govern themselves. And that is what made the American Revolution so astonishing. This was not just a war over land. It was not simply a military struggle between armies in red coats and farmers with muskets. It was a revolution of ideas about liberty, power, rights, and the meaning of freedom. It was a conflict that began with frustration, exploded into violence, and ended with the birth of a new nation that would change world history forever. To understand how this happened, we have to begin with a victory, a British victory. In 1763, Britain emerged as the dominant power in North America. France had lost much of its territory, and Britain now controlled vast lands. But triumph came with a price. The war had been enormously expensive, and the British government was drowning in debt. London looked across the Atlantic and saw the colonies not only as part of the empire, but as a source of revenue. From Britain's point of view, this made sense. British leaders believed they had fought to defend the colonies, and now the colonies should help pay for that protection. But many colonists saw the situation very differently. They already had their own assemblies, their own local political traditions, and a growing sense that they were not simply British subjects living abroad. They were something distinct. When Parliament passed the Stamp Act in 1765, requiring official stamps on printed materials like newspapers, legal documents, and licenses, colonial anger erupted. It was not only the tax itself that enraged people, it was the principle behind it. The colonists had no representatives in Parliament. They had no real voice in the body imposing these taxes. And so a phrase began to spread through taverns, town meetings, newspapers, and the streets. No taxation without representation. That phrase became more than a complaint. It became a warning. Britain repealed the Stamp Act, but the deeper conflict remained unresolved. More taxes followed, including the Townshend Acts, which placed duties on imported goods such as glass, paper, paint, lead, and tea. British troops were sent to colonial cities, especially Boston, to maintain order and enforce imperial control. But instead of calming the situation, their presence made everything worse. Tension filled the air. Suspicion deepened. Colonists began to ask a dangerous question. If the crown could tax them without consent, station soldiers among them, and override their assemblies, then what rights did they truly have? Boston became the center of the storm. In March 1770, the city exploded in one of the most famous confrontations of the pre-revolutionary period. A crowd of colonists, angry and taunting British soldiers, gathered in the street. The situation spiraled. Shouting turned to chaos. Snowballs, insults, and pressure mounted. Then suddenly, shots rang out. 5 colonists were killed. The incident became known as the Boston Massacre. To British officials, it was a tragic event in a tense city, but to colonial patriots, it became proof that the empire was willing to use deadly force against its own subjects. Artists and printers turned the killings into political fuel. The dead were transformed into martyrs. The anger spread far beyond Boston. And then came tea. In 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act, giving the British East India Company a major advantage in selling tea to the colonies. Even though tea could now be cheaper, many colonists saw the law for what it represented, yet another attempt by Britain to assert its right to tax and control them.
So, in December of that year, in one of the boldest acts of protest in American history, a group of colonists boarded British ships in Boston Harbor, disguised themselves in native-inspired clothing, and dumped 342 chests of tea into the freezing water. The Boston Tea Party was dramatic, illegal, and impossible to ignore. Britain responded with fury. In 1774, Parliament passed a series of punitive laws known in Britain as the Coercive Acts and in America as the Intolerable Acts. Boston Harbor was closed. Massachusetts lost much of its self-government. Royal authority tightened. Britain intended to isolate and punish Massachusetts. Instead, it united the colonies. Many Americans who once saw Boston's radicals as too extreme now saw a deeper threat. If Britain could crush one colony, it could crush them all. That same year, colonial leaders gathered in Philadelphia for the first Continental Congress. They were not yet declaring independence. Most still hoped for reconciliation, but they were beginning to organize resistance on a continental scale. Then, in April 1775, the breaking point arrived. British troops marched out of Boston toward Lexington and Concord, intending to seize colonial weapons and arrest Patriot leaders. But the countryside was already alive with warning. Riders moved through the night, church bells rang, militias prepared. At Lexington, in the early morning light of April 19th, British soldiers confronted colonial militia on the village green. No one knows for certain who fired first, but once a shot was fired, there was no turning back. That moment would later be remembered as the shot heard around the world. The British moved on to Concord, but colonial resistance intensified. At the North Bridge, the fighting escalated, and on the long march back to Boston, British soldiers came under relentless attack from American militia firing behind trees, walls, and houses. What had begun as a mission to seize supplies had become open war. Still, even then, not everyone was ready for complete independence. Many colonists hoped the crisis could somehow be resolved, but the violence at Lexington and Concord changed the mood forever. Soon, the Second Continental Congress met in Philadelphia, and this time it had to act like a government in wartime. One of its most important decisions was the appointment of George Washington as commander of the Continental Army. Washington was a Virginian, which helped unite North and South. He had military experience, he carried himself with dignity and discipline, but more than anything, he brought endurance, and endurance would prove essential because the war ahead would be far harder than many Americans imagined. The British Army was one of the most powerful military forces in the world. It was well-trained, well-supplied, and backed by the world's strongest navy. The Americans, by contrast, were improvising a revolution. Many soldiers were inexperienced, supplies were often short, money was scarce, weapons, clothing, food, and ammunition could be difficult to obtain. Some soldiers bravely served and left, others deserted. Disease spread easily. The cause itself often seemed fragile, and yet it endured. In June 1775, American forces fought the British at the Battle of Bunker Hill near Boston. Technically, the British won the ground, but at a terrible cost. Their casualties were shockingly high. The battle proved something important. Colonial forces could stand and fight against regular British troops. This was no longer a mere protest movement. It was becoming a true war. Then, in July 1776, came the moment that transformed the conflict forever. The Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. Written primarily by Jefferson, the Declaration was one of the most consequential political documents in human history. It did more than announce a separation from Britain. It explained why. It declared that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with certain inalienable rights, and that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. These were explosive ideas. In one stroke, the colonies were no longer simply resisting British policies, they were claiming nationhood. They were telling the world that legitimate government depended not on kings, bloodlines, or empire, but on the rights of the people. Of course, declaring independence did not guarantee survival. In fact, it made the stakes even higher. The war entered a brutal new phase. British forces captured New York in 1776, handing Washington a series of painful defeats. The American army retreated, morale collapsed, the revolution seemed close to disaster. At the end of that year, it looked entirely possible that the rebellion might fail before it truly began. Then, Washington took one of the greatest risks of the war. On Christmas night, 1776, with the cause hanging by a thread, he led his exhausted troops across the icy Delaware River in a daring surprise attack on Hessian soldiers stationed at Trenton. The operation was dangerous, cold, and uncertain.